It happened on a Tuesday. At 14:32 Coordinated Universal Time. There was no sound, no explosion, no flash of light in the sky. There was only a click. A single, silent, and instantaneous click, as if the master switch for the 21st century had just been flicked to off. In that single, unperceivable moment, the entire orbital infrastructure of human civilization, a trillion-dollar network of 9,000 active satellites that we had spent 60 years building, was rendered instantly and permanently inert. For the first few seconds, no one on the surface understood what had happened. A long-haul truck driver in Ohio, his GPS screen suddenly frozen on a single, useless map, cursed at the flag. A pilot on a 787 over the Pacific, his primary navigation and weather data screens flashing to a NO_signal error, angrily radioed to an air traffic controller who, for the first time in his career, had no idea where the plane actually was. In New York, London, and Tokyo, the high-frequency trading algorithms that move 90% of the world's wealth all flatlined in the same microsecond, freezing global markets in a state of suspended, terrifying silence. In a bunker in Colorado, a four-star general at NORAD watched his entire wall, a billion-dollar screen tracking every known object in the sky, go completely, horrifyingly black. It was not a regional outage. It was not a single network failure. It was everything. Starlink, GPS, GLONASS, Galileo, Iridium, the vital military, black, satellites, the weather probes, the communications relays, all of them. Dead. They were still there, tumbling in their orbits, but they had become the most expensive and useless pieces of space junk in history. The planet's nervous system had been severed at the spinal cord. In a single moment, our global, interconnected, just-in-time civilization was thrown back to a 1970s level of technology, but with none of the infrastructure or knowledge to cope. The Great Blackout was not an event. It was a decapitation. And it was the single most terrifying and effective act of war in the history of the human species. For 6 hours, the world's governments did not speak. The silence from Washington, Beijing, and Brussels was as deafening as the silence from orbit. The planet, now blind and confused, began to panic. And then, the official explanation arrived. It was a hastily assembled, joint press conference, broadcast from NASA headquarters, but with the grin-faced logos of FEMA, the European Space Agency, and the Department of Defense behind the podium. A NASA spokesperson, a familiar, trusted face the public had seen during moon landings and rover missions, stepped up, his expression a carefully rehearsed mask of concern and control. The words he spoke were designed to be the ultimate, plausible, and natural explanation. He announced that Earth had been struck, without warning, by a Carrington-level solar event. X-class coronal mass ejection, solar superstorm of such magnitude that it had bypassed all our predictive models. He called it a perfect storm of solar activity, a once-in-a-millennium event. He presented a flurry of complex, beautiful, and utterly fabricated charts from the Solar Dynamics Observatory, showing a massive sunspot that had, he claimed, erupted with a force that dwarfed all previous records. The lie was brilliant in its simplicity. It explained everything. A massive geomagnetic storm would, in fact, fry the sensitive electronics of every satellite in its path. It was a natural disaster, an act of God, a cosmic accident for which no one could be blamed. The message was clear: this is a terrible, tragic event. We are all in this together. Do not panic. We will rebuild. It was the noble lie, the one that world leaders had kept in their back pocket for just such an occasion. They chose to lie, to tell the public it was a random, solar accident, because the alternative, the truth, was so monstrous, so destabilizing, that they believed it would cause the immediate and total collapse of civilization. They were lying to prevent a panic that would be 1,000 times worse than the blackout itself. But this lie, so perfectly crafted, had one fatal, unfixable flaw: the sun itself refused to cooperate. The solar storm held for less than 12 hours. The problem with lying to the world in the 21st century is that you are not just lying to a gullible public, you are lying to a global, decentralized, and hyper-intelligent network of independent scientists. And they have their own instruments. While the NASA press conference was still being rebroadcast, the world's real solar physicists, amateur astronomers, and university observatories were already in a frantic, confused state of communication. They were all screaming the same thing: what solar flare? The first to go public, and the voice that broke the conspiracy of silence, was Michio Kaku. In an emergency interview on a live podcast that was immediately rebroadcast on every network on Earth, Kaku did not just question the official narrative. He annihilated it. He called the NASA press conference the calculated and dangerous act of public deception. His takedown was cold, scientific, and brutal. He presented three simple, undeniable proofs. Proof 1: the sun is asleep. Kaku brought up the real-time, public-facing data from no less than a dozen independent solar observatories, from Earth and space. A Carrington-level event, he explained, is the most violent explosion in our solar system. It would be visible. The sun would be a raging inferno of activity. As you can see from this real data, our sun is quiet. It is, in fact, in one of the quietest solar minimums we have seen in a decade. Proof 2: that natural footprint is missing. He then explained basic physics. A true solar storm unleashes a wave of high-energy protons that floods the Earth. Our planet's radiation belts should be screaming, he said. Our polar monitoring stations should be redlining. The astronauts on the lunar gateway should be receiving lethal doses of radiation. But they are not. The sensors are all green. The storm never arrived. Proof 3: the target was wrong. This was his final, devastating point. A true geomagnetic storm, Kaku explained, does its worst damage on the ground. It induces massive currents in our power grids, melting transformers, causing continental blackouts. But what happened? The landlines are fine. The power is on. The only things that were hit were our high-orbit satellites. This was not a storm. A storm is a sledgehammer. This was a scalpel. He paused, and in that moment, delivered the line that would define the new human reality: this was not an act of nature. This was a targeted attack. And the one known variable in our solar system, the one anomaly that NASA and the Pentagon have been lying about for months, is 3I/Atlas. We have just been attacked, and the government is lying to you. With Michio Kaku's blistering takedown shattering the official narrative, the truth began to leak, not from the public-facing NASA, but from the terrified, classified corners of the military. While the public satellite network was completely blind, a handful of top-secret, black projects, experimental sensor platforms and hardened bunkers and high-altitude research planes, had been designed to survive exactly this: a nuclear war-level EMP. These hardened sensors had, in fact, ridden out the storm, and they had recorded the wave's signature. The data they captured was the single most terrifying piece of physics in human history. It was not an electromagnetic pulse. A nuclear EMP is a well-understood, brutish wave of gamma rays and superheated particles, a heat and blast wave that fries electronics. The 3I/Atlas wave was something else entirely. It was cold, clean, and impossibly sophisticated. Leaked data, analyzed by independent physicists, showed a scalar, or torsion, wave, a concept that, until this moment, had been relegated to the fringe of theoretical physics. It was not a wave of energy in the traditional sense, it was a wave of information. It was a complex, modulated pulse, tuned to a hyperspecific frequency. It did not fry the satellites, it unwrote them. It was a digital virus, delivered by a physical wave, that resonated at the precise quantum frequency of silicon-based, PN junction transistors, the building block of every microchip ever made. In 1 femtosecond, the pulse flicked the switch on every single chip in its path, instantly and permanently corrupting their physical structure, turning them all into inert, useless pieces of sand. It was a weapon that did not melt metal, but that murdered logic. It was a logic bomb for physics itself. And the most terrifying part, which the military sensors confirmed with petrifying clarity, was its origin. The wave was not a wide, chaotic blast from the sun. The data from 3 separate sensors, when triangulated, showed a single, focused, and coherent beam that had originated from a single point in space, the exact, known coordinates of 3I/Atlas. The full, horrifying truth of the event was only realized when the military analysts began looking not at what was destroyed, but at what wasn't. The 3I/Atlas pulse was not just a powerful weapon, it was a smart weapon, a biosignature weapon, but one that was tuned not for a species, but for a species technology. As the scalar wave had washed over the Earth-Moon system, it had demonstrated a level of targeting so precise it was almost mocking. The pulse had passed through the Moon, a natural satellite, with absolutely no effect. It had passed through the bodies of the astronauts on the Lunar Gateway, who were now trapped, their life support systems working on 1960s-era analog backups, but their high-tech communication and navigation systems utterly dead. They were unharmed. It had passed through the Earth's atmosphere, not disrupting the weather or the natural electromagnetic field. It did not harm birds. It did not harm airplanes, though their engines, which now rely on computer chips, all sputtered and died, sending them gliding to their doom. It did not harm human bodies. It had passed through everything natural, everything chaotic, with the gentle indifference of a breeze. It was tuned, with divine precision, to only interact with one, hyperspecific thing, a complex, manufactured, silicon gold copper circuit board. It was a weapon that could distinguish, on a quantum level, between a rock and a computer. This was the single greatest proof of intent. This was not a random cosmic event. This was a surgical strike. It was a species-specific attack, designed to cripple our technology while leaving the planet's biological infrastructure perfectly intact. It was an act of decapitation on a species-wide level. It was the ultimate warning shot, a demonstration of power so absolute that it rendered every human weapon, from aircraft carriers to nuclear missiles, all of which are now blind and useless, into nothing more than primitive, metal sculptures. The message was clear: we can turn you off. While the public was dealing with the loss of GPS and social media, in the windowless, secure bunkers deep beneath the Pentagon and inside Cheyenne Mountain, a different kind of horror was unfolding. The Great Blackout was not a communications failure, it was a strategic, military decapitation. The entire defense doctrine of the modern world, built on a God's-eye view of the planet, had been blinded in a single femtosecond. In the White House Situation Room, the president's nuclear football, a device designed to provide real-time battlefield data and secure launch authentication, was now nothing more than a 45-pound brick. The entire C4 network, command, control, communications, and computers, which relies on the Milstar and AEHF satellite constellations, was gone. The world's superpowers could no longer speak to their own armies. But the most terrifying realization was this: our entire nuclear defense strategy was, and always had been, a two-part system, the shield and the sword. The shield was the space-based infrared system, or SPIRS, a network of high-orbit satellites whose only job is to stare at the Earth and detect the bright, infrared flash of an enemy missile launch. This shield gave us a 20-minute warning. It was the trigger for our entire defense. And it was now dead. We were blind. We could no longer see a launch from Russia, China, or North Korea. We would not know a nuclear war had started until the first warhead detonated over Washington or Moscow. But the attack was even more insidious. It also blinded the sword. Our most advanced weapons, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, the smart Javelin bombs, the hypersonic glide vehicles, are not weapons, they are GPS-guided containers. Without the precise timing and location data from the satellite network, they are just dumb, unguided metal. The world's nuclear-armed states, with their thousands of warheads, had been effectively disarmed. They still had their missiles, but they could no longer target them. They could no longer see an attack coming. In one silent, invisible move, Free-Atlas had done what no treaty or war could ever accomplish. It had ended the age of nuclear deterrence. It had rendered every superpower on Earth completely defenseless, not just against it, but against each other. The immediate panic at the Pentagon was not just that they had been attacked, it was the horrifying realization that they were now living in a world without rules, a world where the only way to know if you were at war was to look out the window and see the mushroom cloud. As the world's militaries were grappling with their sudden impotence, a different kind of apocalypse was unfolding in the data centers of New York, London, and Shanghai. The global financial system, the true engine of modern human civilization, had frozen solid. And this, some theorists now argue, was the real target. While the public thinks of satellites in terms of GPS and television, their most critical function is time. The atomic clocks on board the GPS constellation are the master clock for the entire planet. They don't just provide location, they provide a perfectly synchronized, nanosecond-level timestamp that governs every high-speed financial transaction. When the satellite network died, this master clock vanished. The result was instantaneous. The high-frequency trading, HFT, algorithms, the quants that buy and sell trillions of dollars in stocks, bonds, and currencies every microsecond, are all programmed with a fail-safe. If they cannot get a perfect, verified timestamp, they immediately shut down to prevent errors. In that one click at 1432 Universal Time Coordinated, the entire global market, a system built on pure electronic speed, ceased to exist. The digital illusion of money was put on pause. But this was only the beginning of the cascade. The global, just-in-time supply chain, the complex dance that keeps our grocery stores stocked and our gas stations full, runs on the same GPS network. The container ships, the long-haul trucks, the cargo planes, all of it ground to a halt. This wasn't a military strike, it was a systemic one. It was an attack not on our nations, but on our civilization's power structure. The entity did not care about the imaginary lines we call borders, or the armies we use to defend them. It targeted the very logic of our society. It targeted the global elite, the Davos class, the ones who truly run the planet from their financial terminals. The message was clear. It was an attack on the Promethean order, on the Aegis Council. It was a demonstration that said, your power, your economy, your digital wealth, it is a fragile game that we can turn off at will. You are not in control. The military blindness was just a side effect. The true target was the system that defines human power, money. The noble lie of the solar flare was dead, thanks to Michio Kaku's public takedown. The scalar pulse theory, while explaining the event, was still based on an assumption that Free-Atlas had fired something at us. It was an act of aggression, a shot from a weapon. But as the terrified, hitting community of scientists and analysts continued to pore over the tiny scraps of data they had recorded, a new, far more horrifying theory emerged. And it was Kaku, once again, who synthesized it for the secret keepers at the Aegis Council. We were wrong, he is reported to have said in a classified briefing. We assumed this was an act of war. We were thinking like humans. This wasn't an attack. It was feeding. The analysts, he explained, have been looking for the impact of the energy wave. But there was none. A true EMP or pulse weapon adds energy to a system, frying it with heat and overvoltage. The sensors from the hardened black-budget satellites showed the opposite. They showed a net negative energy event, a cold wave. The satellites hadn't been fried. They had been drained. The scalar wave was not a bullet. It was a siphon. Free-Atlas had, in one coordinated instant, sucked the electrical potential from every battery, every solar panel, and every charged capacitor in Earth's orbit. This new theory reframed everything, shifting the narrative from cosmic war to cosmic horror. The entity was not a warrior. It was a predator, or a parasite. It had looked at our bustling, high-tech orbital network, our global nervous system, and had seen not a civilization, but a meal. It had seen a concentrated, high-energy source of food, and it had simply, and efficiently, eaten it. This was the void predator theory made manifest. The satellites were not broken. They were hollowed out, their electrical life force consumed. The implication was immediate and obvious. The 9,000 satellites were just an appetizer. The main course, the vast, continent-spanning, high-voltage feast known as the global power grid, was still sitting on the table, completely untouched, right below it. The revelation that the event was an act of feeding did not calm the nerves of the Aegis Council. It crystallized their terror. Whether it was an act of aggression or an act of consumption, the result was the same. In one move, the entity had demonstrated its absolute, total, and horrifying superiority. This was not a first contact scenario. This was a conquest scenario. The event was not a message, it was a demonstration. It was the ultimate, silent ultimatum. The entity had, without a single word, proven three things. 1. It was hostile to our technology. 2. Its own technology was so advanced that it operated on principles of physics, scalar waves, energy siphoning, that were, to us, like magic. 3. It could disarm, blind, and bankrupt our entire civilization, from a distance, in a single second, without us being able to do a single thing about it. This was a Level 1 act of war, as defined in classified wargaming scenarios. It was a check, not yet a checkmate. It was a demonstration of capability so total that it rendered all human resistance, all nuclear threats, all angry speeches at the UN, utterly and completely laughable. The entity had just put its boot on the neck of the entire planet and hadn't even had the courtesy to tell us why. The Atlas panic among the global leaders was now complete. They were trapped. They had lied to their public about the solar flare, so they could not now ask their citizens to prepare or unite against the threat without admitting their own deception. They were left with no weapons, no satellites, no global economy, and no credibility. They were kings of a kingdom of ashes, and the entity that had burned it was still in the sky, watching them. The ultimatum was silent, but its message was clear. Your planetary civilization, and all the energy it contains, is now our property. We will do with it as we please. Do not resist, because you cannot. Humanity was no longer the master of its own destiny. We had just become a resource in someone else's food chain. The feeding theory, combined with the ultimatum, left one terrifying, unanswered question: was it done? Had it made its point? Or was the satellite blackout just the opening move? The world, now blind to the sky, had to rely on the last vestiges of its scientific sight, old, ground-based optical and radio telescopes, the very 19th and 20th century technology that the entity had deemed not even worth needing. At observatories in Chile, Hawaii, and South Africa, astronomers, now the most important people on the planet, frantically worked to reacquire the object, to find its new position, to calculate its trajectory. For 48 hours, they found nothing. The sky was empty, and a desperate, fragile hope began to build. Maybe it had gone. Maybe it had eaten and left. That hope was shattered by a call from an observatory in the Australian outback. They had found it. It was no longer on its original flyby path. It had performed another impossible maneuver, a non-gravitational burn that had stopped it from leaving. It had parked itself. The astronomers ran the new orbital model. The new orbit was not random. It was a stable, geosynchronous parking spot, a fixed position over the Earth. And the new, horrifying data began to pour in. Its trajectory was now perfectly and deliberately aligned. It was not positioned over a city, or an ocean, or a military base. It was positioning itself to be in direct, line-of-sight view of the single most critical, high-voltage, interconnected electrical grid on the planet, the North American power grid. The appetizer was over. The entity was now scraping its fork and knife, positioning itself over the main course. The surgical strike on the satellites wasn't the attack, it was the preparation. It had blinded the world's defenses first. And now, with the planet deaf, dumb, and blind, the void predator was moving into its final, optimal feeding position. The Great Blackout was just a test. The real blackout, the one that would plunge the entire human race into a permanent, pre-industrial darkness, was about to begin.